if we divert the DRDs to the Prowler, then Moyo will die. Welcome to ScapeChatz, episode 17. I'm Alan, and I'm here to discuss 2 more episodes of Farscape with Magellan. This week, we're going to be discussing Season 2, Episode 9 of Farscape, Out of Their Minds, and Season 2, Episode 10, My 3 Crichtons. First up is Out of Their Minds, which was directed by Ian Watson and written by a new addition to the Farscape writers team, Michael Cassett, and it originally aired July 7th, 2000. Magellan, we watched this episode together. Did you like it?
I did like it. It was fun. It's one of those episodes of Farscape that I think is going to be difficult for the two of us to talk about because it's just kind of good and enjoyable, and you have to watch it to really get the most out of it.
Yeah, but it's definitely a high recommend immediately. For
sure, and it's one of those high recommends, not in sort of a human reaction sense or like a way they weren't sense, where it's like, oh, we're tackling big character issues. It's more of a big recommend along the lines of, I don't know, what's another episode that's at this sort of caliber, would you say?
Some people would say Crackers Don't Matter is up there.
Sure, Crackers Don't Matter.
In that
just like it's a fun episode.
Yeah, or I'm trying to think. There are a couple from season 1 that are like that, but yeah, it's an immensely enjoyable episode that is based around a tried and true sort of plot premise, which is that everybody has switched bodies and they have to deal with that, and that's really the summary of what the whole episode is.
Right.
So the way that it starts is Moya is targeted by an alien ship, and they're talking a lot of... Is this the episode where they talked a lot about defense screens? Or no, that was the second one.
The defense screen played into this episode quite a bit. Yeah.
Yes. Defense screens is always a weird... Because I don't know how to visualize that. I guess it's just shields. But I'm always
it's just an energy shield.
Exactly.
I guess I missed the episode, or I wasn't paying attention when they got that thing. Because whenever they talk about the defense screen, they mention that they got it from the Zelbinian.
Right, the ship from PK Tech Girl.
From PK Tech Girl. So I guess they didn't make a big deal about it back then, but it's sort of become an important part of what Moya can do, is throw up this shield out of nowhere.
And now that's added to her superpower list. It's throwing up shields and throwing light in random directions.
Right, yeah.
So she's like the sentry of this show. Oh my god, I don't think I can get more obscure with my Marvel Comics references.
That's good.
Zahn leaves the ship to explore the ship that's attacking them, and she meets probably... I like this guy a lot. I liked this as a concept. So she meets this guy, Tak, I guess, who is a member of a race called the Halosians, if I'm understanding this correctly. And they're just bird people. But
in my notes, I called them robo-dodos.
That's fantastic. Yeah, because it's like very clearly, I guess, like a big guy with just puppet, like bird hands on both hands.
Right.
And he just sticks them out and then flaps them and talks to her. And Zahn really nails who's the actress that plays her?
Virginia Hay.
Virginia Hay really nails this, like, being able to talk to a puppet, which is a thing we talk a lot about when we talk about puppets with this show. And I think Tak is cool as hell, but it's in like a goofy way, because you really do have to suspend your disbelief immediately, because with like
they have the facial dexterity of shadow puppets.
Exactly.
Like that's what we're working with. It's just a jaw that flaps.
And that's it. And that's the villain of the episode.
Right.
It's the flappy jawed Birdman. It's so bizarre and strange. And then does the episode just get right into it, and then he beats her up or something, and then orders his second in command to fire?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
She tries to be peaceful, and they're not interested in that. And the reason that they give, I think, at first is that Talon came by and attacked these people.
Oh, right. That was cool. That's another nice little callback to a previous episode, because they're saying that Talon, who is Moya's son, attacked this bird people's ship, and so they're like, oh, this is your kid, so you have to be held accountable for it. And they're like, we didn't do anything. And so the sort of overarching plot of the show update that we have at this point is like, oh wait, is what's his name? Lonnie Tupu's character, who isn't Pilot,
Crace.
Is Crace like using Talon to just go on a military rampage?
Right.
Because that makes sense plot-wise, but it also is just a bummer. It's like a really easy... Oh, of course that's what he wanted Talon so badly, so he had a cool military ship. I would have been hoping he was doing other things, but we kind of learn more about that as the episode goes on. Or we learn about it at the end, pretty much. But what this really gets to is that the bird people fire a beam at Moya, which causes a bunch of people to start switching bodies.
Yep, and that's the episode.
And that's all. Yes, exactly. We're just dealing with that. So it's a pretty simple setup to a pretty awesome episode. John Crichton is in Aaron's body, which is amazing. Aaron is in Rigel's body, and Rigel is in Crichton's body. So that's that's the first like 3-person swap. And then the other swap,
we find out that their other characters were hanging out with Pilot.
Right.
Dargo and Chiana were hanging out with Pilot. And so they go through the cycle of it's Chiana in Pilot's body first, right?
Yes.
And then Pilot is in Dargo's body, and Dargo's in Chiana's body.
Oh no, Dargo and Pilot first.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Pilot and Chiana and Dargo. That's the first one.
You're right.
I have that right here, so I
okay.
I know.
Yeah.
It's the reason we're confused is because this happens.
They go through the cycle again later.
And so the first couple like minutes of this, or like really just a ton of the episode, is everybody figuring out what's going on, and then just inhabiting each other's characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it really goes to show how well-defined this show's characters have been up to this point, that you can have 2 humanoid characters fall into each other's bodies and have them feel like completely, wildly different entities. Like Aaron and John swap, and it's not even like, for Lonnie Tupu having to do Aaron's voice, that's a fun joke. But to see Aaron's son become John Crichton and have to do the American accent, that was probably my favorite from the first batch.
Well, and also to see how the people who have the puppets going into them sort of physicalize. Is that a word? What's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah,
make physical the gestures of the puppets. So you have Ben Browder doing the weird temple like Mr. Burns fingers as Rachel.
Right, and he doesn't know how to use his legs properly for a while.
Yeah, it's just a lot of fun stuff that really anybody can look at this episode and pick out. That's my favorite part, or that's my favorite part, because it's just a bunch of little things like that.
Like Pilot not knowing how to pee, but knowing that he does need to.
Rigel,
not Pilot. Rigel not knowing how to urinate via John Crichton's body, and then Claudia Black as John Crichton explaining it's like a gun. You gotta take it out and you gotta aim it and then shoot it.
Right.
And I the minute that scene happened, I was like, the joke is gonna be that he closes his fly on his penis. Is that the joke? And it was, and it was still funny as hell.
Right.
There is, I don't really know if there's a lot of plot in this episode other than just all the different parts. So do you have what are some of your highlights of all of this character swapping silliness?
I think everybody is doing a great job. I don't think there's a single performance that I disliked in this episode. There were some that were a little, like when Pilot is in Chiana's body, there's not a lot that's different, you realize, between Pilot and Chiana's physicalities, because they're both kind of like jerking their heads around all the time.
I'm constantly reminded when I see Chiana do the head jerk of your impersonation of that, which is incredible. And I wish I could show it to people, but it's a thing that I get to harbor close.
Cock your head to the side and you say, "What the frell?
What the frell? What's going on?"
We've been doing a Pilot impression recently.
Yeah, that's become one of our new running jokes between the two of us.
Yeah, and then maybe I'll do it later.
Yeah, it kind of has to fit into what we're talking about a little bit. Yeah,
but it's fun. I really liked Anthony Simcoe's interpretation of Chiana.
Oh my god,
it's sort of very. Exactly the way that we were just talking about, move your head a lot and wide-eyed, and what's going on kind of thing.
But he's also more overtly sexual than she is usually. Just he's very and I'm gonna pop my hips out a little bit more and
And there's the scene where Chiana in Dargo's body flirts with Rigel in John's body.
Yeah. Oh. Right? Which I remember that scene because I think we've mentioned this before, but at some point we fell down the weird rabbit hole of looking up what is the popular fanfiction pairing for this show,
Right.
and we found out that it was by a long shot Dargo and John Crichton. And to see that scene where it's Anthony Simcoe and Ben Browder flirting with each other, you're like, this is it. Everybody is so happy. Like, you feel this like gust of enthusiasm from the whole fan base in the year 2000, all like, this is what we wanted. This is everything. Even though it's two different characters, obviously.
It is a very fan service episode.
Totally.
Is how I would describe it. Because you have the moment where John is in Erin's body and he's like, you know what, I'm going to check out her boobs. That
became the basis for my new favorite running thing of this show, which is that Erin and John, we've talked about their cool sexual relationship for a while, but just the fact that they're so comfortable with each other's bodies that he's like, so yeah, what you're talking about is he finds a moment alone when he's fixing something, and he kind of looks down and goes, wait a minute, these are my boobs, because he's in Aaron Son's body.
Yeah. And
he just kind of like opens the shirt and he's like, huh, this is one,
and
this is the other.
Claudia Black just doing the most like tongue out, douchey, oh yeah, oh, flop. They add like flopping sound effects and stuff. It's ridiculous.
And then they get the perfect, like the two, I think it's Dargo and Chiana come by and they're like, what are you doing?
Well, it's Rigel. Aaron is in Rigel's body.
Yes.
And Chiana is in Dargo's body. And they're like, why? And he's like, oh, come on. I'm a guy. This is every guy's fantasy.
And you're like, is it? Okay, I kind of get what you're saying, buddy.
Which you can argue that there's some... If that was the only isolated incident of something like that happening in this episode, that would be kind of problematic.
Yeah.
Fairly problematic that you're in somebody's body and you're like, I'm just going to check out what's going on here. And we can talk about the end of the episode later. It turns out everybody was doing that.
Yeah.
So...
That's the real plot takeaway that we get from this episode. If we're going like beat by beat, essential things about this episode is everybody wants to fuck everybody and look at each other's genitals.
Right, pretty much.
Just guaranteed.
Yeah, so it's just a lot of moments like that. I don't know that there was a ton of plot, at least in this first setup. I think it was them trying to figure out... There's a lot of people like, oh, I want to be in my old body. This is so weird. And them trying to figure out what happened, I guess.
They do the really smart thing very early on in the episode of to help, because we're having a little bit of trouble right now remembering who's who in which body. But I think, who is it that comes up with the idea? Is it Aaron that comes up with the signs?
Oh, that's right. I think it's John who comes up with it.
Or yeah, so they all basically get like little lanyards with each other's pictures on them. That's like, this is the person whose body is in this body.
Which is very, very cute.
Yeah. So you get these cute, and they're all like, they use a camera, basically. They use like a weird space camera to take this picture as they show it, and I was like, oh, cool.
They print it out of the DRDs, so apparently DRDs can do that.
I think DRDs are just modified Game Boys, and so it's just the Game Boy printer with like the weird bad color palette. I think, what was the other thing I wanted to say about John and Aaron and John swapping? I don't know, that has to be like the most fun. This has to be one of the most fun episodes to film by a long shot.
Just for them to do.
For everyone to just be like, oh, I'm gonna boil down your and to write, obviously.
Right.
I'm gonna boil down your character to its bare essentials. So the person who's become Aaron is like, oh, I'm gonna be super stuffy and British, and like Australian, whatever. They even like shift the accents a little bit. So it's like Lonnie Tupu doing Aaron's son, but he changes his accent enough to still sound like Aaron's son. That stuff's really impressive to me.
Yeah. And yeah, this is the kind of concept for an episode that on a surface level is very basic. The idea of everybody switches bodies is something that almost any sci-fi show is going to have that episode, right?
Right, totally.
Like Futurama had that episode. Buffy the Vampire Slayer had an episode or two like that. It just happens.
Did Angel have an episode like that?
I don't remember. Possibly. I don't know.
We don't talk about Angel that much. I think that's great.
But the point is, I'm sure Star Trek has done this numerous times.
Multiple times, yes.
And so it's a deceptively simple concept, but you can really make it a worthless episode if people don't care about the characters and if it's not fun, or if it doesn't have a twist to it. And the benefit of this episode is that it's just wall-to-wall very fun to watch. And everybody is really engaged with it. And this is a phenomenal cast. Across the board. So it's a joy to be able to see them do this. And it's a testament to the success of the show that we can sit back for an episode and be like, yeah, all right, I'm digging it. I like these guys.
Yeah, like I have no major complaints about this episode because it just kind of progresses nicely. And it has a really nice momentum. Like one of the things we haven't gotten to yet is like Zahn's plot is continuing throughout this episode. And it mostly involves her being really flimsily chained to like one arm, chained to like a wall or like a pole.
Yeah.
But she is like learning about Talon and Christ and how like, oh, they pass by and they attack these people.
And those scenes are take them or leave them, but they work because you can't have the whole episode be jokes. You have to have that sort of plot element to it.
Exactly.
But yeah, so basically what's going on with them, let's just knock out the Holoshan stuff.
Yeah.
So the arc of that is at first the guy claims like, oh, well, Talon attacked us, so we want to attack you. And Zahn's saying, no, there are no weapons on Moya. They're not a bad ship. And
unless you're like, light sensitive.
Right. And the guy's like, okay, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to check to make sure there are no weapons. And he goes, and Rigel's showing him around in John Crichton's body, which is fun.
That's the scene with the urinating, and also that's a weird thing just because you realize that John Crichton has like, unfortunately, just because he's the guy, like he's the everyman, is when they do diplomatic relations things in the show, people assume that he'll always be the person to go. So when they're like, who's going to be the person to walk them around? It's like, oh, John has to go. Even though Rigel's in his body, it has to be John because John's the guy.
Because he's like the commander, I guess, nominally. I don't know when that happened.
Yeah, exactly. Also. It doesn't...
Like, one day Pilot just decided that John Crichton was in charge, and now he is, which
is such a bad idea if you think about it. Like, the guy who is from presumably another dimension is like, oh, I guess I run this town.
Right. Anyway, so Rigel's showing him around, and Rigel's doing some shifty stuff because he wants his body back. I'm a Hynerian, and I want to reclaim my throne, all that.
Yeah, bullshit. All that good stuff.
And this Robo-Dodo is hanging out, and he, like, pukes some stuff.
Oh, I completely forgot about that part. It's so weird.
It's just whatever.
And so then there's like there's like a couple minutes.
He pukes this like red flubber.
Yep.
That does some stuff to the ship or
something.
It
burns through. It's like acid. It burns through. You also called that like 2 minutes early, where he's just walking around and he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna be sick," and you're like, "He's gonna cough up acid blood." It's like perfect.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's what happens.
So I guess he's doing that to debilitate the ship or something. And then you find out that these creatures, if they like kill a certain number of other creatures, they get rewarded somehow.
Something like that.
It's something like that. And Zahn's trying to convince them to not kill the Moya crew. Eventually she gets this guy's second in command to kill him, which again, it's questionable how much these aliens understand what they're doing. Because they seemed kind of, I don't know, they seemed like their perspective was pretty limited, basically. And they were just kind of
I agree.
Yeah, like we just want to kill for killing's sake. So they fire on the ship again, which causes everybody to rotate bodies again.
The rule of the rotating bodies thing is really strange to me. Because they don't realize until the very end that they need to be in the spots that they were originally in to go back to their original
Right, the second
bodies.
time it was just an accident. They were just conveniently in the same spots.
Yeah, exactly. They just happened to be in a perfect, like, 2-3-way patterns.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, like, arbitrary. It just has to work, so we don't need to nitpick it very much. But,
yeah,
totally. That was kind of flimsy.
So for that part, it was Crichton in... I'm just going to go down the list. I have it right here.
So they do another cycle through. Yeah, it's basically everybody goes in the next spot in their 3-person rotation.
Right, so it's Crichton and Rigel, Aaron and Crichton, Rigel and Aaron, and in Pilot's Den, Pilot is in Dargo. Yes. And then Dargo's in Chiana, and Chiana's in... Is that correct? Chiana's in Pilot?
Yeah, I believe so.
Dargo and Chiana can't wake an unconscious Pilot. Oh yeah, because it was Pilot in Chiana's body.
Yeah, so Pilot's having trouble. Like, his consciousness just cannot live inside of another organism. With,
like, legs and stuff?
Yeah.
I like the idea that he just couldn't breathe because he doesn't breathe. And so
I thought that's what it was. I thought that's what it was going to be. Like, no, you have to breathe.
You have to inhale and exhale. But then it was just like, no, his body doesn't. It's not compatible. Because this episode needed to have some conflict. That was really the moment where I was like, all right, I guess the party time's over. The jig is up. We have to do something
Mm-hmm.
to give this episode a nice little arc.
Yeah, so then we basically get to the point where they figure out what's going on is that they threw up the defense screen, and that somehow affects this beam that's being shot to have this effect. And I don't think this next cycle lasted very long. I think they went through this cycle at the break at the end of Act 2, maybe, something like that.
Correct.
So it was well into the episode at this point. But they realize that this is what they got to do, and so they convince Zahn to shoot the ship again. And they have a great moment where Zahn is on the communicator with Rigel, Aaron, and Crichton in the bodies that they're in.
Right.
And they don't explain to her what happened, which seems silly. Like, why not just tell her what's going on? But it leads to a comical moment, probably the most GIF-worthy moment of the episode, where I think it's Aaron in John's body is like, no, Zan, it'll be great. And then she does a weird, like, okay symbol and a smile and a thumbs up.
Yep. That is going to be the thumbnail of this episode. That's a guarantee.
Yeah, it is so good.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's an okay symbol, which was very reminiscent of the waiter from Twin Peaks or the butler, and then just followed up by an immediate thumbs up. Like, is this what John Crichton does? This seems like a human thing to do. I move my hands.
Yeah, and that visual is a perfect encapsulation of the joy of this episode, where Ben Browder is playing Aaron's son, playing John Crichton.
Exactly. It's so it's so layered.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's a fun challenge. I think I would love to be able to like have the joy of creating characters that are that in depth that I can like work with, even if it was just like me and two other people, and we'd be like, all right, or that would be like a fun improv game or something. Is you have to make a character and then now you have to play each other's characters.
Right. But there is actually an improv game like that. It's called Character Switch or something like that. Like you are in the scene and everybody's playing a character, and then whoever is moderating it or being the ref or whatever, they clap, and then you like cycle around, and now you're playing other people's characters.
Right. For people who don't.
So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, for people who don't know, Magellan's is he does improv things. That's why he's so knowledgeable.
But the way to make that game work, and it's the thing that these actors do all the time, is you establish a character with extremely strong affectations, so that anybody can look at them and say, "Oh, if I were gonna boil them down to a pastiche of what they're doing, this is what I would do." Exactly,
because you need to, it's all about the definition, and like you can. I also think of it as the silhouette rule, which is a good thing for in general for like a sci-fi show. Is if you can identify each character in the main cast by their silhouette, then you have a interestingly diverse cast of characters. But then continuing the Mass Effect connections with this episode, just kind of segueing, like the idea that Pilot was inside of Chiana, both visually and conceptually, reminded me of Edie from Mass Effect, who in the third game of that series basically. She's like the ship's AI the whole time. Oh, Magellan just sent me the gif of the thumbs up. She's the whole time in the series. She's like the ship's AI, and she talks to people. And then in the third game, they find a robot body that is rendered useless, and she's like, "Can I take this?" And then she just becomes a person that you can hang out with, but she's still in that body, and then she can hop out and be the ship's AI whenever she wants. And it's a cool. I love that. It's one of those concepts where you can instantly humanize like a voice, or in this case, humanize the like Rigel and Pilot puppets by putting them into someone else and be like, oh, what are they when they are not their limited sense of gesticulations? What are they beyond that? But getting back to the main episode, the thing I noticed that was ridiculous, the whole Zahn thing where she's tied to that pole, and then she gets out just by like using her power bracelet or whatever. The way she gets out is by getting out. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
It's such an easy solution. And we complain a lot about this show sometimes going for easy little like moments to keep the plot moving. And I don't think it detracts from this episode, but it definitely is like, all right, guys, again, with you couldn't write it as like, oh, and the ship, like a part of it collapsed and it fell. It had to be like, oh, she has a magic bracelet that instantly did it. Why didn't she do that earlier?
We're excusing a lot of arbitrary moments like that. precisely because the episode presents itself as it's going to be a fun jaunt into this concept, and let's not take it any more seriously than that.
Yeah, and I think they do a cool bit of consistency with that bit, though, where she says that her hand is hurt. Seriously. Is that her that she's referring to during that part at the end? Zahn tells Rigel that the damage to her hand will heal slowly. I think she does.
Yeah.
She breaks her wrist or something. So that's a little better. You're okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you agreed on that. And so
they convince Zahn to hit the ship again with another blast, which switches everybody back. And Aaron and Crichton are very happy that they're in their own bodies again, and they just kind of wrestle.
It's so weird. It's so cool, but so weird. They're just like, "Yay, I'm back. Let's get into it." Like they're like 10. They became 8 years old, and they're just so happy. But it's this moment of bliss that it doesn't feel weird or out of character. It works, in my opinion. That's just like, I want to use my body.
And then poor Rigel is like, well, back to being ignored.
Yep, exactly. That's his line. That's how he leaves the episode. And you're like, oh, Rigel, babe, you got to be the leader. Because he does. He gets to be the leader. He gets to be the white guy for a little bit. And then it's like, all right, I guess I'm just going to go back to being in my cool hover chair. And then he kind of gently hovers off screen while the two of them are sexing.
And then kind of leads us into the tag here.
Right, the tag, which kind of is the other half of the John Crichton being like, oh, it's great, you get to squeeze boobs. That's what every guy wants to do, is be in a girl's body and touch her boobs. Which is that Aaron's son, he kind of, they mention that, and she's like, yeah, don't ever do that again. And then he's like, don't tell me you wouldn't have done something. And she's like,
well, no, it's...
or what is the line? I should have just...
So they have the exchange here on the quotes section of the Farscape Wiki.
Excellent.
John says, well, they say you have to walk a mile in someone's shoes to understand them. And then Aaron says, well, I certainly know what you were doing when you were in my shoes, Crichton. He says, give me a break. She says, it's okay, you know. You were in my shoes, I was in your pants, ...
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
And then they go off and bone.
Do they? Is that the implication? Is that they leave to go bang it out?
Yeah. Well, because Dargo and Chiana, minutes beforehand, did the same thing.
Yes!
Because Dargo's like, hey, I'm in my body again. What'd you do with my, tentacles? I feel weird. They feel kind of cool.
She's like, I did some things. You got cool
great.
tentacles.
I really like being inside you. Oh, I mean inside your body. Oh, I mean...
That was the line, dude. That was my favorite line of the episode.
You can have a moment in shows where you're like, I really like being inside you. Oh, I mean inside your house. And it's like, okay, you meant to say something that wasn't ridiculous. But Dargo didn't have something that he was trying to say.
He said exactly what he meant to say, but then realized how weird it sounds out of context.
Yeah. And then she's like, I like being in your body too, or whatever. And then
they're like,
they go off and they bone, and everybody goes and bones.
Except Rigel, and Pilot. Poor babies. They're gonna find love someday, I'm sure of it. But yeah, it's this weird you get to be in the other half, and now I just want to be in the other. It's this really easy sexual metaphor. Also, when you get to be inside someone else's body, you end up wanting to be in their body and explore them carnally. Which I love about the show, is that they're so open about sexy stuff like that. And I hope, to all goodness gracious, that Aaron's son being intimately familiar with John Crichton's penis is a thing that just goes for the rest of the show, that they constantly reference that, and that gets them out of trouble, or Scorpius is defeated by her knowledge of his member or something like that.
Right.
And that's what I thought about this episode. John, could you find me the background information for this episode and tell me all about it?
I could, and I did, and I'm going to.
Those are 3 things I need you to do. Good.
Yes. Good. The cast, there's a lot of fun info about how the cast got in the right headspace to do this and what they were tweaking. Apparently they rehearsed this episode by videotaping each other and, trying to mimic mannerisms, which makes sense.
It's the 90s, or, 2000.
Apparently the ADR took a long time to match up precisely because they were doing such different things. Because I think at this point and throughout the show, there's a lot of ADR going on.
Constantly. I barely notice it because it's so constant at this point.
Right, it's all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, used to it.
Then Ian Watson. Okay, so apparently the Hellotians. Have you seen the Dark Crystal
Is that the one with David? No, I've seen Labyrinth, which is very similar to Dark Crystal, but I haven't actually seen Dark Crystal.
Anyway, there's Dave Elsey, who's the costume designer, right? Or
correct.
Something
like that.
He's part of the Henson Company. Claimed that the Holotians were a riff on the Skeksis from the Dark Crystal, but Ian Watson, the director, didn't feel that way. If you're interested in that, there's a long quote here about it.
I'm looking at a picture of them, and they totally look exact. It's like the same exact thing. Dark Crystals, in case people don't know, is a kid's film from 1982 that was done by the Henson Company and is like creepy and kind of dark and had a lot of puppets in it. Mm-hmm. So it's right up my alley, but I haven't seen it. All
right, I'm going to read this piece of background information verbatim because the wording is a little confusing to me.
Go for it.
And see if you can parse it. The original plan was to have everyone overdub the voices with the actor that normally played the character, but Watson changed that because he felt that swapping would be more effective with the actors themselves.
I think the way that is worded makes no sense.
It's not well worded.
I think what he's saying, or what they're saying, is the idea originally was to be like, okay, Aaron is in John's body, so when John speaks, it's Claudia Black's voice. But then he was like, no, it should be Ben Browder doing a Claudia Black thing.
Because they do at the beginning, when they first switch, before they have the photos.
Yeah.
They do have both voices going at once.
Correct. Which is weird that they switch. I don't know.
Yeah. Jonathan Hardy, the voice of Rigel, joked that Ben Browder's version of Rigel was very similar to Sir John Gielgud, who's, old school famous English actor.
Yeah, Johnny Be Good. That's what you said, right?
Johnny Be Good, that's right. The neck photos were a late addition to the script by Watson, but Ian Watson, which was a good idea, I think.
Absolutely. 1,000,000% agreed.
This is an idea that had been germinating since the beginning, the origin of Farscape. It was one of the first ideas that Rockne O'Bannon and David Kemper generated back when they were the only two people on the show, which I didn't know that was a period, but I guess that...
The good old days. Farscape, the college years, and it's just the two of them doing the voices.
It's just them on beanbag chairs, and they're like twirling their braids. And it's like, David, what do you want Farscape to be like? Well, Rockne, I want it to be like this.
He's like, I want it to be a fantasy battle show with puppets, and everyone's got swords and shields. And he's like, that
sounds so cool.
Except what about lasers? And then,
let me write that down.
Let me write that down. Did you guys hear that new movie, The Matrix, is coming out? What? And then it went from there.
So O'Bannon said that even though this was an idea that was very early, they didn't put into the first season because the audience didn't know the characters well enough and the actors were still nailing things down, which makes a lot of sense.
Totally. This is an episode that needs to be deep in.
Yeah, interesting piece of information here. This episode also helped actors figure out what they do with their normal characters, right? Because some things you're just doing instinctually, but then when you're forced to not only mimic somebody else but coach somebody to mimic your character, you start to realize the things that you do intuitively, and you can be like, oh, okay, I should do this more often. So Anthony Simcoe, this episode made him realize that when he would get a script for Dargo, he would always change contractions to be both words instead of the shortened version.
I cannot do this, yeah.
Right. Because that's just the way that it felt natural to speak. And so when Gigi Edgley was playing Dargo in Chiana's body, she was doing the contractions, and he's like, no, you gotta split it up.
Yeah, it's the closest thing you can get to holding a mirror up to your character. And you're like, is that what I sound like? Is that what I do all the time? Because with like Claudia Black doing Ben Browder, she's not just doing John Crichton, like she's doing Ben Browder as the only American in this cast or whatever.
Right.
Where he has a little bit of a southern drawl, and she that's like insane how much she nails his accent and his weird physicality with his hands and stuff in this episode. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Claudia Black consistently is the best thing about this show.
Yes. I think we can.
And then this last piece of information is just what we said, that initially they used dual track audio of the voice of the person and the body, and then they get rid of the person voice.
I don't know why they did both. They should have just like cut. I don't know if that's like the way that things get filmed. Is once it's done, it's done.
Well, I think it's more that they need a way to let you know what was going on immediately. And then after that, they didn't want to do it for the whole episode. And so the pictures worked.
Oh, okay.
And you can just kind of chalk that up to, it's not something that's happening in universe. It's just a device that is being used to communicate an idea to the audience.
Right.
And it's not, that's not necessarily a satisfying answer, but this is kind of a complicated concept that you want to get out quick so you can do the fun jokes. So you kind of let it go.
Fun episode overall. I definitely recommend it to anybody watching this show for the first time. You only need to get a general idea of what everyone's thing is before you can fully enjoy this episode, I feel like.
Yeah.
Some of the Zahn stuff will kind of go over your head, but it's not super meaty.
It's definitely a fun episode. I think it's well placed where it is, because we did have a few like clunker episodes that kind of brought us down in terms of, is Farscape good? What's happening? So it's nice to have this sort of breath of fresh air. But I also think, if you're watching Farscape with somebody and you are partway into the first season and they're kind of like, I don't know, I mean, I get it, I'm feeling it, but I'm not totally feeling it. This is a fun episode to just throw at them and say, look, it can be joyful and silly.
Exactly, and that's a perfect encapsulation of what this show is at its best, which is interesting but also still fun and doesn't take itself overly seriously.
For sure.
But in terms of things that aren't, things that are interesting but aren't handled as well, I think it's time for us to move on to our second episode of the week.
Okay. Oh yeah, let's do it.
Hello, ScapeChatz listeners. Alan here, popping in from the future of when we recorded these episodes to bring you this week's Moyabag, where I take a few minutes between the discussions to read and respond to some of the lovely feedback that we get on the podcast. Starting off with some tweets as usual, which as always can be sent to @ScapeChatz on Twitter. First up is a comment from the lovely who sent us another memo with the main interesting points being that they're a big fan of Aaron and Zahn as a sort of ship, and yeah, Claudia invented Aaron's vest according to them. And they had this lovely quote, "The feminist in me doesn't like that Aaron is more sexualized this season, but the lesbian in me, well," which, I can sympathize with with both of those thoughts other than the lesbian part. But I do think that Aaron's a pretty lady, and I love that we can agree on that. I also like their comment that, quote, "You guys do this thing where you take things I'd usually take for granted as sci-fi normal and make them funny, and that's awesome," which we noticed that a lot when we were first doing these episodes of just like, there's so much stuff, because the two of us, like Magellan and I, haven't watched a lot of sci-fi together, and our sci-fi like backlog stuff that we've watched in the past is not like super dense, and we haven't watched everything. So when we see this stuff, like, we don't have a huge sense of normal. Like, we've seen Star Wars and I've watched Star Trek, a lot of it, but that's kind of it. So the stuff that's like normal to people who are dyed-in-the-wool sci-fi fans is super weird to us. And we got a new fan, @Enstatic Dax is a new listener and is now catching up. Welcome to the crew, Enstatic Dax. We hope you survive the experience. Over on Reddit, where we put up a episode thread every week at reddit.com/r/Farscape, Billy_Low mentions that we were looking for the word farbot at some point last week, but I have a garbage memory and I already forgot the context of that. Also, they said the worst thing about your podcast is that I always have to wait a week for a new episode, which, that's so nice. I wish we could put out more than one a week, but I like the sort of anticipation. I think that's good. That's sort of the similar thing that we have to do when we watch the show. Related to that, Blue Blaze Spear mentions that we were looking for the term Hesmana, which is the Luxon word for hell, and that just reminds me that I absolutely love this show's crazy dictionary. Maridi says, "Don't shit talk the live action Mario movie," which I don't think I was. I am actually really... I recommend people watch the live action Super Mario Brothers movie. It is kind of like a infamous train wreck, but it's a fascinating train wreck, and it's really weird, and it's not boring. That's the thing with, like, I consider art to be of poor quality if it doesn't make me think something and it doesn't make me feel something. And the Super Mario Brothers movie definitely made me think and feel a lot of things. Not all of them were good, but it is a trip for sure. Maridi also says, "It was great that they didn't use the truth to solve the crime," in referring to the second episode, and how it's Rigel and Chiana and they get their way by trickery, which makes sense. And they also sent in some wicked gifts from Out of Their Minds, which coincidentally we mentioned how gifable the thumbs up is in Out of Their Minds in the thing that you just heard. So, there you go. Blue Blaze Spear had a comment, and they were negging Magellan for not seeing Total Recall, which reminds me that I really want to sit Magellan down and watch a bunch of 80s sci-fi classics with him at some point. That could be a thing that we could do this summer, theoretically. And Blue Blaze Spear also sent in some great points on Dream a Little Dream and how awkward it felt because of its messed up place in the arc. And how this season still hasn't hit its stride, which Magellan said last week, and their argument was that the season hits its stride around the Look at the Princess trilogy. What does everyone else think about that? Like, what do we agree? Do we disagree? When do you think that season 2 got really good? And they also referenced how it's really wild that we haven't had a good sci-fi Law and Order show yet, especially considering that classic sci-fi doctor show Mercy Point got 8 episodes in the late 90s, and yet we still haven't had a good sci-fi Law and Order. That was all the feedback we got this week. Thanks as always for sending those in. Just a couple notes on the episodes that you were discussing this week. For Out of Their Minds, which you just listened to, I mentioned that it was weird that Rigel couldn't breathe when he was in Chiana's body. Again, we forgot the thing that we always forget, which is that Rigel is amphibious, which is why he has that trouble. And I really want to talk about episode 18, which you're about to listen to, which is my 3 Crichtons discussion. So, I mentioned in the episode how I watched it in a hotel room in Connecticut after going to a wedding, or the weekend of a wedding that I went to with my family, and I really always find it fascinating how we as people attach memories of where and who we were when we consumed something and experienced something, be it pop culture or art or whatever. I have that with a lot of ScapeChatz episodes, and this one in particular, that trip to Connecticut was really weird for me just because I had a lot of stuff personally going on that I don't need to get into, but I still think about it as oh, that was the evening where I watched my 3 Crichtons in bed on an iPad. It's weird and it's silly to mention, but that's the stuff that imprints on our brains, is where we were and who we were at the time. And also this, I don't want to spoil any of it, but I think that this My 3 Crichtons discussion is probably one of the best that we've done up until this point, just because we managed to pluck something, in my opinion, very much worth discussing from the nonsense that is that episode, and just getting into some good stuff that I really I listen back to it, I'm this is what ScapeChatz should always be. We have fun, we talk about how dumb stuff is, we talk about the dumb conventions of the genre, but when we're talking about what is this show saying and what is it trying to do and what does it make us feel, I feel that is what ScapeChatz is trying to be, and sometimes we just struggle to get there. And I've just been thinking a lot about this stuff, and My 3 Crichtons is an episode about seeing where your future can be, and also looking down at your past. And right now, Magellan and I are both just we're entering a really crazy transitory period of our life, and it's just scary to think about where you're going to be and where you've been. And it's just ScapeChatz is the rock that kind of keeps us here in the present, at least for me, because I edit it every week and I listen back to myself from this one was from September 1st of last year, and just to think about the way I talk slightly differently in certain conversations, and the things I've learned about Farscape and about myself and what I value, that is really just, it's what I get out of the show. So I don't know, what I recommend everybody record something of yourself at some point and just put your current self into a capsule and then come back to it in a few years, in case you're ever oh man, I'm not really changing as much as I would have hoped. You are, we all change in these subtle ways that we don't pick up on until later, and it's really important that you keep track of how much you are evolving as a person. Real quickly, before I wrap this up, I just want to once again plug my other podcast, Fireside Friends, which is a podcast that I do with another friend of mine, Ryan, and our mutual friend Katie. We talk about pop culture and we do a shared experience. It's bi-weekly, and we're really looking for some more listeners. We put a lot of time and effort into that show, and I think it's something special. It's way more laid back than ScapeChatz is, and we just have fun conversations, and we talk about interesting stuff and navigating the world as young people on the internet, I guess. So please check Fireside Friends out. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts, or firesidefriends.simplecast.fm is the link to go to. With that, I'm going to let y'all listen to the My 3 Crichtons discussion, and as always, let us know what you think, and we'll talk about it next time on the Moyabag. we're talking the second episode that we watched this week, which is My Three Crichtons. That's season 2, episode 10, and it was written by a bunch of people. Story.
Yeah, I want to talk about who wrote it a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
So, this is one of those episodes where getting to know who's writing what is going to be a worthwhile endeavor, because the script. So the story is by Gabriel Stanton and Harry Worksman Jr.
Correct.
And those two worked together on a previous episode from this season, which was Home on the Remains,
which I didn't like.
Yes,
that was the weird. That was the weird, like, mining planet.
The mining, and there's a ton of stuff going on, and this episode feels similar to that, I think.
In that there's a ton of stuff going on, yeah.
In that there's a lot going on, and there's potential for something cool to happen, but it doesn't really find where it wants to be. And I will say this was a bit more focused than Home on the Remains, which is due to the person who wrote the script, Grant McCallum, who, if you look at what he's written so far, it's Durka Returns and Vetus Mortis, both of which are episodes that we didn't particularly care for, but that you could at least say, like, well, they're focused. They have a thing that's going on.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say verbatim.
So that right there tells you everything you need to know about this episode, really.
Well, you also need to know that it was directed by Catherine Miller and aired July 14th, 2000, but that's just for completionist sake.
Yes, this is the first episode Catherine Miller directed, so she's an unknown quantity at this point. I don't remember the direction sticking out to me terribly much. I thought it was fine. So.
No, it's a ton of close-up shots of just face. It's people talking. It's like you could practically film this episode as a bunch of talking heads, just because it's a lot of costuming and makeup work mostly.
Right. So
what's cool about this episode is that it's essentially a bottle episode, but it's like, you know, one of the quotes in the background info was like Rocking House Abandoned being like, yeah, only Team Farscape would make the most expensive bottle episode ever. Not literally, but like just an episode where the same actor has to film himself 3 different times and drastically difficult to put on costumes. So that we are referring to John Crichton, of course. And I guess I can just start by asking what you thought of the episode overall.
I didn't like it very much. I thought it was I don't even know that it was a great idea, because I think you can look at this idea and be like, well, that's probably not going to be a good episode. But they do uncover some interesting, or some sci-fi conundrums worth exploring.
Definitely.
Because science fiction oftentimes is really great about creating life and then forcing you to decide whether that life is, like, real. And what ultimately defines life that we should be protecting, and is there a soul, and all this stuff. And that is what this episode... Right, that's what this episode is trying to get at eventually, but it gets mired in just kind of some dumbness that it can't really escape from.
The main issue with it is that it's like there's like 2 characters that are in this episode that are interesting and have things to say, but then they're mired by the fact that there needs to be a plot and that there's a villain that doesn't need to be there and all of this stuff. I'm just going to say right off the bat that Magellan, you were saying you kind of checked out of this episode after a while.
I did. I think part of it was also that for a while there wasn't any real conflict going on.
Definitely. Yeah.
And the conflict that we got was extremely, like, we know how this is going to play out. There was never a point where I was worried about anything, because this episode creates a scenario that cannot possibly become the status quo, and it cannot possibly alter the status quo.
Right, like,
and this it tries to convince us that it can.
Exactly. It tries to convince us that the characters care enough that they might replace one of their main cast members with an alternate version of himself, and it's like, no, that doesn't.
Which is ridiculous. Why
that makes no sense. And they very quickly realize that that's not going to happen. And then the whole self-sacrifice thing is predictable as well. But as we dive into the plot, I should say that I actually I watched this episode untraditionally. I watched it on hotel Wi-Fi because we were we were at a family wedding in Connecticut this weekend, and it was boring. And I like was up Saturday night late just watching Farscape, and then I watched a bunch of Hey Arnold. So that's where my life is right now. I'm in a good spot. So I was basically, whenever I watch things on my iPad and I don't have any other distractions, I'm like wrapped and I'm just completely involved in it because it's this little box that you have to hold in front of you and just look at it. And so I like absorbed so much of this episode, but it's just such a shame that this isn't the kind of episode that you want to like take in.
Right.
You're like, oh, I'm into this. 3 Crichtons. One of them's really smart. One of them's really dumb. And one of them's a caveman. See, the joke is that the middle one is the cave. Okay.
No, I wasn't paying attention. That's good. There you
what
go.
the? Oh, man.
Sorry, dude. I thought you were going to be normal with it.
You thought I was going to be regular.
You were goofing. You're getting your goof on.
I'm straight goofing tonight. So the way the episode starts is Aaron... So dumb. Aaron's in the maintenance bay taking Moya stuff out of the Farscape one to use in her prowler, which... Rude. Uncool. Which he immediately gets bad at.
There's a lot of... If you follow this through line over multiple episodes, there's a lot of passive-aggressive John and Aaron diverting Moya's resources between their 2 pet ships.
Yeah.
Like, it's a point of contention in Crackers Don't Matter, I think. It's a point of contention in one of these episodes recently where John's like, pilot, we need some DRDs. And he's like, they're working on Aaron's prowler. And he's like, who cares?
And then pilot's like, if we divert the DRDs to the prowler, then
Moya I sneezed right in the middle of the bit.
I got mute powers. It's all good. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that is a weird running thing that this show does a lot. And so they're fighting, and then a big, just green sphere hits the ship, which is such a like. The plot. We got attacked by the plot. We got hit by the episode premise.
Right.
That's exactly what that is.
Aaron, the way she reacts to it does not make any sense.
Her instinct is to shoot it?
Well, right. Well, she shoots it at first, and she's not really reacting to the fact that it's fully engulfing John Crichton. And she's like, oh, that didn't work.
If I keep shooting it.
Well, so her solution is to get a bigger gun and to shoot it with a bigger gun.
It's so... like human of her, which just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Of her to be like, this is a problem. This is something from the outside world that I don't like. Better bring out the big guns. Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't think to look at it or to like wait and see what it was going to do,
or to like go grab John.
Yeah, or get in there.
There are better ways to deal with that situation.
She shoots it a bunch, and then it kind of lodges itself in the ship, and it engulfs John. And my first note here, because I did take notes for this episode, was I really wish. She said Crichton 3 times when she was yelling for him, because she goes Crichton, and I'm like, just say the third one. The joke is that there's 3 Crichtons. That's the name of the episode and the whole premise. I got mad. The like part of my brain that really likes organization and completeness was furious at this episode from minute 1, and then so that's the cold open. Is we're like, oh, is John Crichton dead? Because yeah, that's a thing that makes sense. Is John Crichton just dies in the middle of the show,
right?
And we come back and we're introduced to, I guess we're just going to start calling them by what the show creators called them. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, let's review what those names are.
So the first Crichton that comes out of the green orb is a prehistoric man Crichton. Yes. And the show creators referred to him as Neandro, which is, I guess, a Neanderthal sort of thing.
Neanderthal.
So that was the moment where I was like, wow, this really is just going to be an episode where Ben Browder puts on different costumes. That's what this is, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And he gets to roll around on the floor and be a barbarian. And then we get regular John Crichton, and he's like, Neandro runs away and immediately doesn't let himself get shot and runs into a corner where he finds Chiana and they start bonding. What did you think about that relationship?
I don't know. It made sense, I guess. I just didn't like Neandro very much. And we can talk about that. And maybe it's unfair of me, but he just kind of grossed me out, honestly.
He is. He's a gross, hairy beast.
His dentures were weird, and I don't know. And maybe that's bad because should every sci-fi character be pretty? Probably not.
Yeah, and he's barely, like, he's a he's on a show full of pretty people, and he's a little bit ugly. Is the
Right.
thing. That's probably also why it felt weird to you.
Yeah.
But him and Shiana bond just immediately because she's like, "Oh, you're crazy and you're gonna kill me," and he's like, "No, me, friendly, me, John." He just speaks in these like single word.
Yeah, I guess the thing of it is it's a very typical concept where there is a barbaric creature with a heart of gold.
Yes.
And it's a surprise that this feral beast is nice. And the girl, whoever the girl of the show is, bonds with it and is like, no, it's not a crazy beast, it's a nice guy. But the fact that it's John Crichton kind of takes the surprise out of that a little bit and makes it harder to care about, I guess.
And
because we know John Crichton.
Yeah, we know that he's a good person.
Yeah.
In the center. And so for her to be like, "Oh, he's the version of you but better," is the beginning of, but not the best version of this episode's thesis, which gets further developed as we get the third Crichton out of the green sphere of plot development, which is Futuro. Is that what it was?
Maybe.
I think
sounds good enough to me.
Futuro, which is supposedly John Crichton in the distant future. And this Crichton's identifying characteristic is that, well, first of all, they give him the costume from A Bug's Life, which was nice, the like peacekeeper commander outfit. So that was a nice little,
the cool vest.
Yeah, and his like identifying physical features are that he doesn't have hair and his like brain matter is showing, which is a cool cap to give one of your actors. It's probably a pain to wear. I always think about that kind of stuff. Like, ooh, that must be a pain in the ass to get on. But then the other thing, he has so many weird quirks that Ben Browder brings to the character that are really fascinating. Like, he's almost always gritting his teeth. So I wrote here, yeah. I would love to poke future Crichton's brain with my finger, but if I can't get that, my consolation prize would be to try and fit a pencil between his gritted teeth.
And I think part of that, I think he's wearing a weird denture as that.
Yeah, he has like different teeth. Exactly.
Yeah. And he like doesn't have a dick.
So. Or he doesn't have one or it's way small. I
think he doesn't have one.
That's
the idea.
So that was the callback to the other episodes, like, oh, Aaron knows what John Crichton's dick looks like and is fat and is intimately knowledgeable about it. And now she's like, oh, this one is different because he's missing something down there,
right? Which
is a cute little joke, I guess.
So basically, the idea is that Neandro is an ancestor genetically of John, who just happens to have John's personality, like a biological ancestor, a genetic ancestor, and then Futuro, whatever, future guy, brain guy. Who am I thinking of? Who has a brain, an exposed brain? There's like a comic book character with like an exposed brain. No, I'm thinking of Mojo Jojo.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
from Powerpuff Girls.
I'm always thinking of Powerpuff Girls, but okay.
He's actually a lot like Mojo Jojo because he's like the genetically advanced version, and he's like evil, but also he just kind of wants people to like him. You know,
he's just misunderstood. No, fuck Futuro. He sucks. The biggest douche.
Yeah.
And then also his other identifying feature is that he apparently in the future John Crichton just develops a thicker accent.
Right. Like
he leans harder into his southern accent, which we'll talk about in the background info. There's a fun little bit of trivia about that. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's the same thing as last week where they spent a couple minutes being like, this situation is weird, what do we do? And we very quickly find out that the three Crichtons, the titular three Crichtons, have the ability to hear the green orb and have it talk to them. And it's like, hey, you guys were... I listened to this and I didn't understand what was happening. It basically I shouldn't gender it. It basically says, you guys messed me, you fucked me over, or you like hurt me, and so my payback is that I need one of you as sacrifice.
Well, so what it is,
what it is with Magellan.
Welcome. It's some kind of alien vessel that's meant to collect genetic material.
Okay.
And study. It's like if somebody's going out on a safari to get specimens for a zoo. or something.
Yeah.
I guess.
And it has all of them except human.
Right. So it goes for John because he's something that it's never seen before. Is the reasoning of the characters as the episode goes on, and it captures him. And it's like, all right, great. We got this human, and we're running some stuff, figuring out all of the potential of its genetic code. Like, where did it come from? What could it develop into theoretically? One of those things being Futuro as a possibility. But then they mess it up and they get him out of there. And so it says, hey, I was harvesting some genetic material. I want that back so I can keep doing it. You either need to give me one of these 3 things, or I'm going to just consume everything. Within a metra is what it said.
Yep.
Which isn't very far.
Nope. We have the Farscape glossary at this point, right? We know what these words mean. Mm-hmm. What does a metra translate to?
I think just a meter.
Oh, okay. Well,
like, why not just stand outside?
Or like stand on the other side of the thing.
Yeah.
It kind of just felt like an annoying house guest because they constantly walk into the room where the green sphere is and they're like, it's still there. Yeah. We didn't get. It's like a gross, like a bug or like a bee that's flying around the room. And they're like, oh, someone close the door until it kills itself.
Right. And there's some stuff about like we got to turn on the defense screen again.
Yep.
It's getting a lot of work. These 2.
That episodes. Was a terrible scene where the Futuro and John Crichton are like, what do we do? And then Futuro tells Aaron Son, like, oh, you got to tell John to turn on the defense screen. And John's like, what do I turn on the defense screen? And they get the call. And from Futuro, that's like, hey, you should turn on the defense screen. And he's like, Rigel, turn on the defense screen. And you're like, this isn't a word anymore.
Yeah. And it was annoying. I guess they had to do this because Ben Browder's playing both characters. But there's a lot of this episode spent with characters in separate rooms talking over the comm links to each other.
Exactly.
Specifically, John talking to Futuro.
Like they quiz each other at one point, which is kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
But there isn't. It's just so much talking.
Yeah.
There is. Speaking of talking, there's a really nice line where they're talking to President John Crichton about like what his current situation is, and I'm gonna try and deliver it correctly, and then explain why I was frustrated by this line.
Okay.
I'm widening my perspective. That's what makes me me. Which is, if you just listen to that line, it's a great, very cool line that encapsulates John Crichton, but it's again ruined by the fact that Ben Browder can only say it by doing his slow motion shouting thing. If you just write that line on a script, it's like, this is perfect. Ben, go. And he's like, I'm widening my perspective. Sounds like Michio Kaku or something. It's like, oh man. I love Ben Browder. I make fun of him like every single week, but he's
come
great.
on, Dargo.
Yeah.
my Ben Browder.
Oh, and then at this point I wrote here, I'm not paying enough attention because this hotel bed is comfy. So who has to die? What? That's why I didn't know what was going on. It's like I hit a nice comfy like cold spot.
So they set up this completely artificial conflict where one of these 3 has to die. And from the beginning of the episode, this is part of the reason that I found it hard to sympathize with Neandro also, is from moment 1, you know that Neandro and Futuro are going to leave.
Totally.
Like, they can't be here. You can't have this show where there's like a caveman and a brain guy, and they're all the same guy as the normal guy. You can't do that. And you can't have the show where one of them replaces the normal guy, because then you don't have a normal guy.
And that is what immediately breaks this episode, is because everybody's talking about like, oh, you know, Futuro is like more knowledgeable than John, and he's like overall a much more intelligent person. So maybe he'll replace him. And you're like, no, what are you saying right now? And then Neandro is incredibly stupid and is, you know, undeveloped, so he can't do anything. So it just it robs the whole core tension of this episode immediately.
Right. So you know, as an audience member from the beginning, that these 2 guys are going to hit the road somehow soon.
Yeah.
And you're like, this Neandro's kind of dumb. He's probably going to do something dumb, and Futuro's a jerk, so he's probably going to get killed, or he's going to, you know, die in a stupid way because he's just a mean guy and we don't like him. And then they set up this thing of like, one of you has to die, and nobody is at home going, oh no, what if John Crichton dies? What? Oh. That would be crazy.
It's fake tension of the week, man. We say it pretty much every episode.
Yeah.
The ultimate one.
And so, but to this episode's credit, very quickly they lean into that and they say, okay, yeah, it's not going to be John Crichton. We know. So who's it going to be?
Right.
And then Futuro is the voice of like, obviously we're going to kill the caveman, right?
Because he's useless.
He's like an underdeveloped being. We're going to throw him in there. And John Crichton doesn't want to just do that, which made this episode drawn out pointlessly. But it's a nice moment from John Crichton where he asserts the fact of like, no, I still have lines that I'm not just going to cross. I'm not just going to kill this thing. Just because it's the logical thing to do. There's no morality to doing that. So that I liked, but it was a foregone conclusion from the very beginning because this episode doesn't give us any tools to fight the green blob at all. So know that they're going to have to acquiesce and give somebody up.
So then that right there becomes the part of the episode that I found interesting, like good on its own but not developed, is that Is it's inevitable, and so they have to accept that, like, oh, we can't communicate with this thing, we can't fight with it, we can't use any of our normal tools, we have to acquiesce to it. And me at home, I'm just going, like, get rid of the two new ones. Not because of plot and, like, consistency, but, like, they don't belong here. They're not useful at all. The old one is, like, really nice, but doesn't know how to, like, use bath wash, and the new one is, like, cold and calculating and becomes a villain of the episode via his sort of neutrality throughout the whole thing. And
there's no indication that this is going to kill them also.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They're going to become subjects. Almost.
You can say, like, this is the debate that the episode's trying to have on some level is, well, can you just... These guys exist now, and just because they have the same identity as somebody else who exists, does that mean that they are redundant? And, that's the question.
It's actually a sci-fi concept that the show Rick and Morty handles kind of well in a couple episodes, is this idea, like, when you create something, yeah, it's funny to be like, oh, it's my alternate dimension baby, I don't need it, but it's still a baby. Like in the latest episode, this isn't really a spoiler, but it's about this concept of pocket universes, and like, Rick, the main scientist character of the show, creates a pocket universe in which the leader of that society creates another pocket universe, in which the leader of that society, etc., etc. And so when he's like, oh, we just kill the bottom one, it's like, no, I've lived a lifetime. You are the one who created the Big Bang that led to the sperm that was in my dad's balls that became me. Like, you can't just kill another dimension's version of yourself, because that belongs somewhere else. Yeah. And also the other cool theme that I wanted to dive into with this episode, if we're going to just start laying them out, is this idea of, like, humanity and the capability for compassion, and do we as a society are we going to lose that ability to empathize as we become more technologically advanced and intelligent?
Right. Is that something we're going to evolve out of? Is it a liability for us to be empathetic?
Because Futuro is at no point like I like the idea of Futuro as the villain of this episode, because he is just like, this makes so much sense, just do it, just kill him, he doesn't belong here. And they're like, no, but he's still, like, you're using a he pronoun, if you're gonna call it not an it and you're gonna call him a he, then you can't just toss him out the airlock, or in this case toss him to the green orb of plot development. You can't do that. And that's why John Crichton comes out sort of the nice middle ground of this episode, is he's like, I see where he's coming from, but I hope to God I don't turn into that kind of person.
Right. And
so you empathize with John Crichton a lot in this episode because of that. I don't know, do you think we're going to evolve out of empathy at some point?
I don't know. I don't think so. But it's purely speculative, really. I hope not. I mean, I'm sort of in the same stance that John is at the end of the episode, where it's like, that's a path that we could go and we should avoid it. Because if we're all just cold, logic-based beings that are willing to kill for the sake of it, for self-preservation, then we're animals then. We're not really humans at that point.
And we become the Borg.
Yeah, and there's sort of, you can make the argument that maybe Futuro is perhaps less evolved because of that. because he's returning to a state where, yes, he can reason, but all of his reasoning is entirely meant for self-preservation, and there's no compassion in what he's doing. And I would like to think that compassion is one of the heights of sentience, and that as a special evolutionary state.
Right. And it's a cool sci-fi idea that it gets explored in a lot of media, especially lately because of all of this AI technology that's advancing, is like, yeah, some of the things that are fundamentally human are really stupid and really just things that don't make sense logically, but are things that form the basis of a complete human.
It's what I was talking to you after I watched Ex Machina.
Right, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Yes.
Yeah. That movie that came out earlier this year about the lady robot.
You should all see it, by the way. It's fantastic.
Oh, it's a great film. But that is the reason why the character of what's her name? Ava. That's why she scares me, is because she is Futuro. It's the ability to understand empathy and to understand relating to other people, but to not understand the inherent value of compassion or of empathy without seeking something as a result of engaging in it.
Yeah, and this idea that humans are not a bullet point list of a couple things like sexuality and compassion, and like, oh, once you have these, you're human enough and you can live with the rest of us. It's like, no, you're still, you gotta have crippling anxieties and the desire to produce something and the desire to leave a legacy and the desire to like see other people and to be actively social in some way. These are fundamentally weird. Sorry, I'm using that word a lot. These are just basic things that make us people, and Futuro doesn't have any of them.
What it's ultimately about is the decision that John Crichton makes, reluctantly, but he makes it, which is he decides that he's the one that's going to walk into the orb and sacrifice himself.
Right,
which
he's ready.
The episode does not do a great job of making us believe that that's going to happen.
No, it does not.
But let's assume for a second that he really is gung-ho about it, and he's really going to get himself killed. The point that is being made there is that humanity is being able to care for, understand, and respect something that is larger than yourself. And so in this case, it's valuing Moya, the crew of Moya. And Futuro doesn't value that. He's
willing to join them, but he isn't willing to become a part of them. Like, he's willing to take over.
Right.
And to be the new Crichton.
All of his arguments for, like, I would be useful to you guys are meant as a way of saying, keep me around, help me survive because I can do things for you. As opposed to, I care about your well-being, which he doesn't, you know. That is the nugget of this episode that is worth thinking about, but it's not worth thinking about for very long because this episode doesn't handle it very well.
And I wanted to ask you because we've now hit we've been doing this for a while, and we've hit a lot of episodes that have really interesting ideas but don't always land the mark, and don't always nail what they're trying to say. And I'm wondering why you think that either is happening with the show overall, or what is it about this episode that just doesn't make that work?
I mean, I think on some level it's just hard. It's hard to do that. You know, television is a beast that is quite fickle in that respect because there's so many steps that intervene between creating the idea and actualizing it where a million things can go wrong. And you can have the concept, and maybe the concept can't sustain over 42 minutes, but you have to do 42 minutes. And so you have scenes like in this episode where they're like, well, put up the defense screen. What do you think about the defense screen? Oh, I think it should be at this %. And you quibble about that stuff for too long.
That's the fluff.
Right. So I think that's part of it, is that it's just hard to do that in TV. And sci-fi also, it's difficult because you have to stray into uncharted territory and try things and boldly experiment with weird ideas because you don't know what's going to hit and what's not going to hit. Like one of the second episode that we watched that we loved was the episode where it's like there's a weird, I don't know, there's like bugs on the ship and they can like create clones of people.
Oh yeah.
And then they talk to the bugs. And like that's batshit on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
But it can turn into a cool episode. And so this, you don't know on a piece of paper, like, is it going to be great? I think you can kind of, maybe this far into the show, you can start to feel out what works for Farscape. And that is when you know you have a show that works, is when you can look at a science fiction concept and say, this is how we can Farscapeify it and make it click, and get episodes like A Human Reaction, for example.
Yeah.
And so I think we are transitioning from the throw everything at the wall phase of the show to the we get what is going to work if we throw it phase. And this hopefully is one of the death knells of that era of, I don't know, it's crazy, but we got to try it to see if it works.
It's the thing I appreciate about this show a lot, is that it takes chances and does these weird things, which is why I overall think that this episode is cool and kind of entertaining. But the reason I think that it doesn't work as a Farscape episode specifically is because it's not funny.
That's true. Yeah, it's very self-serious.
Which is so weird after, especially just right before this was like the funniest episode of the show so far. And now we're getting this like really deep, or like attempting to be deep, treatise on humanity and what it means to be human. And I feel like there could have been so much levity involved that was like missed potential. Because as we've seen, this show at its best is leaning into its comedy and its sci-fi in perfectly equal measures.
Yeah.
And that's the thing it needs to do more.
Because the new stuff that we get, I don't know, like the space for making something light and funny here should be coming in the form of either Neandro or Futuro.
Right.
And Neandro, you can't get it because he can barely talk. And he's just so down the line caveman that you're not going to get anything interesting from him. And then Futuro is just like, he's a douche. And he's not fun, and he doesn't work with anybody else. And he has to kind of be the bad guy in a weird way. So yeah, I think that's exactly on the mark, that it's just not funny. It's kind of, but that plays to the idea of, it's a concept that you can put down on paper for any sci-fi show within those first few and be like, what if there's an episode where the main character, there's a genetic versions of him? And you can say, all right, let's try it. And they didn't do the extra step of saying, well, this is Farscape, so this is how we would fiddle with it. Like, I think the way you fix this episode is you throw somebody else into the orb.
Oh, okay.
Because why does it have to be Crichton?
I guess the practical reason is just because he's the main guy.
I know. But honestly...
You're saying, like, if you could write the script again?
Yeah, throw somebody else in the orb. Throw, I don't know, somebody who needs character development. Throw Chiana in there. Throw Aaron in there. Whatever. So then you have the genetic ancestor of one of them, and then the possible genetic development of one of them. And, you know, the reason to not do that is because you want it to be about humanity, but you can find humanity in doing it about somebody else. And you can still have John Crichton be like, you know, our ancestors were hairy, they were monkeys.
Right.
And I think do that in dialogue.
What you're getting at, and I think this must have been an interesting conversation in the writer's room, is like, this is an episode about humanity, so if they're only doing it with the human, they have to remember that sci-fi doesn't have to be about humans for it to also be about humanity. Sorry, right. That is worded weirdly.
No,
but
I think that's great.
Like, Aaron and Pilot's relationship is one of the most human on the show, and neither of them are humans.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's stuff like that. Like, you have this infinite canvas of, like, races and ideas that can all tie back to things that are universal truths. And instead you chose to pick the, like, generic guy and be like, oh, what if the everyman became really cold and mean? Whereas you could have, like, every single person on this cast would have had a different future and past self.
Mm-hmm. That
would have been equally, if not much more interesting to explore.
Right. And maybe that episode would have tanked, but it is worth exploring.
Right.
And this episode just really shows that the character of John Crichton can be fantastic for the show, but he can also be a big liability because you can. I always talk about A Human Reaction because I love that episode to pieces.
Yes.
Having John Crichton in that episode is what makes it perfect.
Exactly.
He is at the very center of what's going on in this crazy episode, and he is the reason that we can understand it. But My Three Crichtons, on a certain level, you don't want it to be about John Crichton because it's boring, and it's kind of like, I don't want him to be the main dude all the time.
Yeah, and it being boring also is like problems with length and problems with editing and direction in this episode. Like it's, I think we have defended our opinion of why this episode is not as good as it can be.
Yeah.
Enough at this point. Speaking of weird direction, before we get to background information, I wanted to point out a couple weird specific scenes that I knew, like, if I take notes on these, they'll be fun to mention, but they're not, like, you won't remember them probably. Specifically, the very last cut from commercial, which is in, like, the last 11 minutes of the episode, it starts with Dargo, like, grabbing Chiana's shoulder and turning her around, and if you... that's all that's happening, and he's like, oh, Chiana, blah, 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 the three Crichtons are going crazy. That shot looks like it must have been, like, take 70 or something. But, because just imagine of, like, all right, everyone on their mark, and go, grab, turn, Chiana, look what's going on. Cut, you said it wrong, or you grabbed her too hard, or something. It just, there are a couple, every time you, like, if you really pay attention to the way this episode, in the show, cuts back to and from commercials, that's usually where the editing gets kind of sloppy. But then, like, specifically speaking of bad directing, the other scene that I wrote down was the cut after Rigel tells Chiana that he's going to shoot the next Crichton he sees, which is a cool conversation, actually.
That's a nice line.
Yeah, he's just like, literally the next one that walks in the room is dead. She's like, what if it's ours? And he's like, we don't need him. Just stone cold. But the next shot, if you look at it, is, and I thought I was dreaming, or if I flipped my iPad or something, it's a 180 spin where the frame starts upside down and it spins, just does a clean 180, and then, oh hey, it's John Crichton standing still. It's like a completely unnecessary.
No, I don't remember that.
I now that I think about it, it might have been like my iPad rotating, but I usually put it on orientation lock, and I'm like, is this why? Because I don't know. There are moments like that where I'm like, who directed this episode again? You got to get your stuff together. Catherine Miller. I guess she's new, or Millar. She is trying new things, and that's cool.
I want to cruise to the background information, but before we do, let's just round out the plot.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We didn't actually finish the episode.
Basically, all that's left is this is the conflict. We got to kill one of the Crichtons. Future Crichton is like, hey, we got to kill the caveman. Duh. And eventually John says, yeah.
I volunteers for you.
That makes... Well, no, he eventually
agrees.
Right.
He agrees.
That they should kill Neandro. And Future Crichton... I like this exchange where Future Crichton is like, do you want me to do it? Because I can do it. I don't care. And then John says, no. I want to do it.
I have to do it.
Yeah. So John goes to find Neandro. Turns out Chiana let him loose.
As she does.
They were friends. Then John goes to find him. He finds him in a place, and Neandro's like, how'd you find me? And John says, well, I just went to where I would go if I was scared.
Yeah.
And then he lets Neandro go, which is nice. John Crichton gets to still be the good guy. He decides that he wants to be the one to go through. Futuro gets mad about that. And
right, because he says that's not how the plan was going to go. It doesn't make sense that you, the middle of the three ascending order Crichtons, why would the middle go and not the worst one? Is how Futuro seems to think about that.
I know, but I don't remember why he was mad. Because he wants John gone.
John gone. I'm not sure. He just is mad in this episode a lot.
And then Neandro shows up and just beats him to death. In
like one hit. And then he gets on top of him. He like knocks him in the head, and then he's unconscious, and then he beats him to death. Yes.
And then he's like, well, I don't belong here. I'm out. Bye.
Adios. Also, I'm taking him with me.
Yeah. And that, I guess, is a triumphant and cool moment for him. But again, we don't care about that character because he was expendable from the moment that he was created. And
the fact that he went himself. Because John's like, we can put you somewhere. We can figure out something to do with you. And Neandro's like, no, I don't belong here. Essentially. Obviously, he doesn't say that. And he just goes, I guess I'll take the dead body with me and we'll both go in. And then bada bing, bada boom. So then it's like, this episode was nothing but like light character development. And nothing permanent came out of this episode, essentially. Mm-hmm. The green orb is gone and we saved the day. Like, ugh.
And then we have kind of a tender moment between John and Chiana at the end.
Yep.
Where he's like, man, turns out the most underdeveloped version of me was the cool guy. And she's like, hey, I knew he was going to be cool because I know you and you're cool. Smooch on the shoulder.
Yeah,
awkwardly stand up and walk away.
Smooch on the shoulder is like A, band name. B, just it was a weird moment, like a weird
strange
directorial choice or something. Just don't kiss because it's weird for you two to kiss, but do be like close because we need to have a cute moment at the end of this episode for the network.
Right.
And then yay, credits.
Pretty much it. So background info. This surprised me. This is the first episode of the series not to contain any guest stars.
Oh,
that's news to me.
I guess that makes sense because this show is founded on being like, hey, here, who's the new thing? And this time the new thing is CG.
Right.
And
in the script, the three versions of Crichton were called Futuro, Neandro, and Crichton. Although on the Farscape wiki, I'm amused by this. In the bottom, below background information, they always have links and references, is what it's called, but they have the credits for the episode.
Yeah.
And right here it's written, starring Ben Browder as John Crichton, and John Crichton.
Someone had fun doing that. That's a joke thing, I think.
Neandro's outfit was created by Jim Henson's Creature Shop, and it was just a fursuit with a muscle suit underneath. Which, that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
Makeup was inspired by Dick Smith's work on Altered States. I don't know if that means anything to anybody, but that's what that was.
I loved Altered States. Alan, do you actually know what that is? Oh, wait, this looks cool. It's from 1980. A Harvard scientist conducts experiments on himself with a hallucinatory drug and an isolation changer that may be causing to regress genetically. Oh, okay. And William Hurt's in it.
We got Rockness O'Bannon talking about the concept of a bottle episode for Farscape, which you brought up already.
Yeah. It's way too expensive to be the actual technical definition of a bottle episode because we didn't save money with this.
They never really do a proper bottle episode.
Also true.
Interesting bit of Farscape has a lot of instances where things are filmed in a different order than they're aired. This episode was filmed after the Look at the Princess trilogy, which we're going to be coming up on starting next week.
Yep.
But it was broadcast before it, which they did as breaking up the pacing or something. I don't know why.
It mostly has to do with Aaron and John, apparently.
Yeah, I guess so.
Here's the bit. Go for it.
This is the bit. We were talking about this before, and you were saying that you were kind of hoping you would just hear me say this for the first time on the show.
The listener gets to do this now.
The listener does get to do this. You may have noticed that Futuro talked with a very thick accent, southern accent. Turns out, Ben Browder, I'm just going to read the whole quote.
Yeah, go for it.
He adopted separate accents to differentiate the characters. He said the actual reason for differentiating an accent was because there's a lot of stuff over the comms. I looked at the script and thought that if I sounded the same over the comms talking to myself, it would be confusing as to who's talking, which that makes sense.
Right.
So good job, Ben Browder. If you listen closely, you actually hear Bill Clinton as the future guy. Nobody got it. Normally, in most science fiction, the evolved person is going to be very well-spoken and have an English accent. But I think the future is Bill Clinton.
I think the future is Bill Clinton is maybe my favorite Ben Browder thing of all time.
I liked Futuro's accent.
Me too. It wasn't obnoxious. It wasn't too ridiculous, but it was thick enough that you're like, oh my god.
Yeah, and it was kind of creepy.
Yeah. You don't get a futuristic villain that also has a southern accent very often.
So I dug that, and I think the Bill Clinton thing's a little cheesy, but I respect that he made a decision and he really stuck
and it worked.
With it. Yeah. Erin's reference to future John's lack of equipment harkens back to the fact that she was in John's pants.
Right.
There you go.
And the events of human reaction where they boned.
So that is my 3 Crichtons, and that's us for this week.
As we leave you, I would like Magellan to do me a huge favor as I interrupt him for the umpteenth time, because I need to ask him to interrupt me by giving me the Netflix summaries for next week's Farscapes.
You'd like that, wouldn't you?
I would, and here's the thing. Next week is a special episode of ScapeChatz, because did we agree on this? Are we going to do it? Am I going to announce it right now?
We haven't discussed it.
Can I throw out one idea right now?
Yeah.
3 episodes of Farscape for 1 episode of ScapeChatz.
I'm into it.
We're into it. We're in a triple deluxe.
Yes.
Because next week
3 descriptions. It's our first ever official 3-parter.
Yep.
We had kind of a pseudo 3-parter last season with
A Bug's Life, Nerve, and a Human Reaction. And whatever the last one was.
The Hidden Memory.
Yes, correct.
Yes. This is our first official 3-parter.
I'm excited. It's going to be a big one.
Okay. Can you read the titles? Because this version of Netflix that I'm looking at doesn't show the full title. They're long titles because they have a overarching title for the series, and then each part has a subtitle.
Yes, I can, in fact, do that for you.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so Season 2, Episode 11 is called Look at the Princess, Part 1. A Kiss is But a Kiss.
Great title. That's fun. The crew travels to a planet under the rule of a benevolent monarchy. The queen-to-be has had her DNA altered by agents working for her brother.
Ooh.
Okay.
That's Part 1. And then we have Look at the Princess, Part 2. I Do, I Think. I Do, I Think. That's weirdly written. What is that?
Agents working for Clavor try to assassinate Crichton, but they're thwarted by a peacekeeper on a mission to stop Clavor from taking the throne.
I already know who the peacekeeper is. Who else would it be but Scorpius? What? Like, why would... Oh, I guess Netflix is weird with their summaries. It's fine. And then you have Look at the Princess Part 3. This might be the best title ever. Look at the Princess Part 3, The Maltese Crichton.
Crichton and Catrala are frozen so that they may watch over the governments of the next 80 cycles. Clavor and Karn attempt another assassination.
There's so many names!
Yep.
To be fair, that's like, going into the third one of 3 and being like, what are those weird characters?
Yeah.
But I'm excited. We're gonna get Scorpius, I've heard. I've heard this is a great batch of episodes, I think.
Yeah, from what I understand, this is where we lock into
Good
what
Farscape.
Farscape is going to start to be for the rest of the season, and then into season 3.
Right.
Like,
so,
we are coming out of a long stretch of concept of the week episodes and moving into a more serial version of Farscape.
Right. We're talking Captain Crunch. We're talking Fruit Loops.
Yum, yum, yum.
CTC. French Toast Crunch.
Aaron, I have the DRDs in the kitchen now, but if Moya doesn't get her Cinnamon Toast Crunch, she will die.
But Pilot, we only have 1% milk in the fridge. If Moya doesn't get her daily dose of vitamin C, Moya will die. Oh, man. Thank you so much for listening to ScapeChatz episode 17. I've been Alan, and I've been here with Magellan.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the show again with me, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Amigo.
As if I'm a guest.
Yeah, thanks for being my continued Skyped in guest, my interview guest. And you can follow us on your social media if you're into that sort of thing. I'm at Alan Ibrahim on Twitter. That's ALLENIBRAHIM. And Magellan, my partner in crime, is at Just a Fluke. He posts funny tweets all the time. Not all the time. Sometimes. I had to edit myself there. I'm like Lucy from Twin Peaks. He's at Just a Fluke, but that's weirdly spelled because it's JUSTAPFLUKE. Mm-hmm. So make sure you type that into your social media apps. Gotta love those apps. It's 2:43 in the morning where I'm recording, and I'm exhausted. So thanks again for listening. Oh, also, one more thing. Magellan has a cool webcomic, and it's called The Platonic Solids, and you should read it. It's updated several times a week, and it's found at theplatonicSolidscomic.tumblr.com.
Thank you.
And also, and you can email us if you have questions, comments, or feedback at ScapeChatz@gmail.com. That's ScapeChatz with a Z @gmail.com. This has been ScapeChatz, somewhere in the universe.